Greetings. Today we're going to talk about the next section of China's dynasty, the Zhou dynasty. Zhou is spelled Z-H-O-U, but it's pronounced Joe, kind of like Uncle Joe. This time period of China was probably not a very happy time for the Chinese. The people there did not have a single king or a leader. They were just led by local tribes. So you had a sort of a division of labor, but the division of labor was not quite as complex as, say, the Egyptians or even the people of Mesopotamia. You more or less had a leader/king, certain lords and warriors, and then peasants, and that was pretty much it. This time period is going to become known as the Warring States period. Basically, there was just constant battling for land. Certain tribes were fighting for power, they wanted more influence, and this was probably not a very happy time to be alive. However, what is important about this time period are the philosophies that developed. Not that the philosophies were important during that period of time, but some of the philosophers that are going to come around, their philosophies are going to profoundly influence China in later dynasty periods. So I want to go over them at this point. The first philosopher of this time period, who was born around the mid-500s of BC, was Confucius. And you guys probably are familiar with him because of fortune cookies, I guess you could say. But that's really a complete oversimplification of this very brilliant man whose ideas and philosophies still profoundly influence China even today. Confucius was saying, his whole idea was that the structure of China was falling apart. And the reason why China was falling apart is because they were forgetting their rituals. He was very big on the concept of family, of relationships, of ceremonies. And he said that if we could just have the right relationships with each other and we performed the right ceremonies, that these traditions were important and they would hold together society. Confucius believed that at the head of any family was the father, and there were different relationships and different ways of going about the relationships. The most important, of course, was the father to his family, then the father to the son, then the father to the wife, then the father to the daughter. And if you think about China's one-party communist system today, in many ways they treat their political leaders as if they were the heads of the family. And indeed, very often they speak about China as being one large family. Many of these ideas have come directly from Confucian thought. In case you're curious about learning more about Confucius, I recommend reading his book called The Analects, or The Conversations, where he outlines in great detail about how to have proper relationships and perform certain ceremonies. The next of the great philosophers was a man named Lao Tse, and his name is actually pronounced and spelled differently depending on which texts you read, but his philosophy has been universal. If you've ever seen the symbol of the yin and yang, that comes directly from the philosophies of Lao Tse. Lao Tse believed in a philosophy called Taoism, or the Way. And what he basically said is that we don't need, in stark contrast to Confucius, we don't need lots of rules, we don't need lots of ceremonies, that everything that we want to do or that we feel is already natural. We just need to be like water and we need to flow in nature. We need to blend into nature, not actually try to oppose nature. Much like Confucius, many of Lao Tse's philosophies are still very popular in society today. If we break the word Taoism up into two parts, the Tao or the Do, we can see it in the ways of words such as Judo, meaning the gentle way. And Taoism is a way of thinking where people should all try to blend in with nature and live in harmony. His book, The Way and the Power, talks about how to achieve this. The third philosopher, who is lesser known than Lao Tse and Confucius, probably because his philosophies were so dark, but they did profoundly influence the next dynasty of China. His name was Han Fei, and he came up with the idea of legalism. And legalism is radically different than both Taoism and Confucianism. What legalism says is that people are inherently evil, And if you don't give them strict laws and strict rules, they're going to become like anarchy, and they're going to destroy everything, and it's going to get completely out of control. And only by ruling through fear and power can you ever have a successful society. So, Confucianism, thoughts, ideas of the family and relationships. Lao Tzu, Taoism, blending in with nature. And Han Fei, legalism, rule by force. As I was saying before, none of the philosophers, Confucius, Lao Tzu, or Han Fei, were popular during their time periods. But there was one philosopher who was popular during this Warring States period. And he wasn't as popular later on, but he became wildly popular during this time period because he spoke in great detail about how to conquer other people. His name was Sun Tzu, and his book, called The Art of War, became wildly popular at the time because people wanted to understand how they could be successful in battle. Sun Tzu's ideas of war were so popular that war generals throughout time have read it, and it's even required reading for some Wall Street firms. He goes into great detail about the most effective ways to defeat your opponents in battle. And he goes on large conversations about why success through psychological warfare is infinitely more effective than physical warfare. And that's where the famous saying, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies even closer. And one of my particular favorites is when he said, if you can get your enemies to fight your battles for you, you've reached the highest pinnacle of war. So that's Sun Tzu in The Art of War. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for listening.